Hello and welcome to the Building Podcast. Many in our industry believe that construction must evolve if it's going to meet its obligations for economic delivery, sustainable construction and social value. All three requirements are now part of modern client expectations, yet our industry has not yet developed a full set of skills to measure or deliver on them. So today we're going to look at cultural change within our sector. And I'm really pleased to welcome Elle George to the Building Podcast. Elle is one of our sector's warriors, fighting, promoting and delivering on these three agenda items. And I'm looking forward to debating the most pressing areas and obvious solutions with someone who's at the front line of change. Elle, welcome to the Building Podcast.
Thank you so much, Mark. Thank you very much for the invitation. As Mark says, I'm Elle George. I'm founder of Elevate FBE Limited. FBE stands for Future of the Built Environment. And it's at the moment, it's just a consultancy, and perhaps I'll come back to why I've said at the moment, but it's a consultancy dedicated to transforming the built environment through innovation, sustainability and systems thinking. And I've done it because I've founded Elevate, and it was about 3 years ago to challenge the outdated practices that we've got in the sector and to help us accelerate this transition that we need to more healthy, more sustainable and much more resilient buildings across the whole sector. And I founded Elevate because I was frustrated by the slow pace of change that we've had and I've been working in construction since about 1998 was the first time I stepped onto a construction site. And so I've known for decades really that our buildings are inefficient, they're expensive to run. And we know that now, I mean, I've been going on about it for a couple of decades, but we now know as an industry and as a society that buildings are contributing massively to carbon emissions. So we need to have, rather than a lot of short-term fixes, we need to think about much more holistic long-term solutions. Yeah. And that's why I created Elevate, because I think that there's a lot that we could do to come together, to learn, collaborate and really see what good looks like. And you've already said, not just in theory, but in practice, in action.
Absolutely. And delivery is what it's all about. There's plenty of talking around this. Elle, what were you doing before Elevate? What was your sort of role in the industry?
Yeah, so I've been lucky that I've worked across a number of different types of work within the built environment sector. So I started life as a contaminated land consultant, following a civil and environmental engineering degree. And I was on sites for most of the first decade of my career, doing a lot of site investigations, a lot of land quality assessments, and understanding a lot about chemicals in the ground. And I suppose that really fed into some of the stuff I did later about the importance of health and the impact of our environment on people. After doing consultancy for a few years, I did move into contracting, and I was working for Carillion for a number of years. I worked on a number of big projects, schools, massive hospital project. And then I had a very brief stint in the rail sector as a design manager. Railways, you know, good on you for working in railways, but not for me. So I went back into buildings and I became a BREEAM assessor. So I was Building Research Establishment's environmental assessment method. I was one of the BRE's very first BREEAM assessors, and that really did sort of pave the way for the rest of my career, really thinking about all the different ways that sustainability interacts with buildings, both social, environmental and economic. And then following that, I moved into working for a property developer. So that really gave me a sense of understanding the whole journey of the way we build. And the financial aspects, obviously, they came home a bit more for me as a property developer. That's what really counts. I worked briefly in social housing for a registered provider, a landlord. And then I went into manufacturing of homes, which was brilliant. I was the innovation lead for a housing manufacturer. And then immediately after that, I set up Elevate. So I've spanned a wide range of different parts of our industry.
Brilliant. And I think, I mean, really the exciting thing for me about all that experience, Al, is that you bring both industry knowledge together, but you've got the technical background to mix that with the sort of the social and the human factor within the sector. And that,
Hopefully, I think engineers are notoriously awful at communicating, and I think I do bring that skill that I feel like I can communicate with a wide range of stakeholders, and I think that comes from working with and in lots of different types of environment. And communication really is key because we've got so many of the solutions that we need for these problems that we talk about, but we're not very good at actually delivering them. We're not very good at talking about them and working out how we're going to do it with the stakeholders that are involved.
yeah. No, I mean, collaboration is absolutely key, isn't it? And you need to be able to communicate to collaborate. And I know with a different hat on, but Constructing Excellence Midlands has created a collaboration diploma because the
Yes.
clients in Constructing Excellence are saying that you talk about collaboration, but you don't know what it means. And so we've
So
had to
I
create a
did that
diploma.
diploma. I
You've
did
done
that
it. Oh,
diploma, yeah.
brilliant.
So when I first founded Elevate, I was working with Energy Sprong as their collaboration lead, and I spotted this diploma, and I thought, well, this has got my name written all over it, and I did find it very useful. So thank you, Constructing Excellence, for that.
Brilliant. I might come back and get a case study off you then, because I think we need, again, to communicate out to everybody about the benefits of these sort of this qualification. Anyway, let's ask a nice simple question, Al, to start with. Yeah, what's getting you up every morning today? What's the passion that drives Elevate and you to get up and go and make a difference in the industry? What are the key things you're looking at today?
Well, I've always been passionate about sustainable buildings, and now that I've got my own business and I'm working with clients that I choose, I really feel that I'm making a difference and that I'm able to put some of the ideas that I talk about into practice. So I worked with Energy Sprong for a couple of years, and I really feel like they're doing a lot of impactful work. And I've got a new client, Indie Nature, now, which I'll talk about a bit more in a minute. But really, those clients and their missions, I'm driven by the fact that they're enhancing people's lives, and that they're making things better. So when I was working a lot in retrofit, the potential to impact people's lives when you retrofit is immense. There's so many millions of people whose health is impacted by respiratory issues caused by damp and mold in their homes. And they say that I think it's 1.4 billion is spent by the NHS on dealing with health poor health from homes. So if we were to think a bit more holistically about solutions for that, around addressing people with health issues and looking at their home environment, we would be able to save millions, and that's a systems thinking approach. So I'm driven by good design and prevention of these unintended consequences. So I love shaking things up, and I think that the construction industry needs a lot of shaking up. So I suppose I'm driven by a sense of urgency as well, that climate change is really on our doorsteps now. So we really need to be a bit more bold and ambitious and change the status quo.
Yeah, I think you're being very kind. I think climate change has got through the door already. It's
Yeah,
not on the
well,
doorstep.
exactly. And people are talking about, some people are still arguing about whether it's human induced or not. And I'm not really going to go into that debate, but we can already see that the climate is changing, whether it's us or not. That debate will leave, but we know it's changing. So what are we going to do about it? We need to build much more resilient buildings. They need to be resistant to flooding, to heat extremes. And we're an island, so we've got to be a bit more resilient than we are. And of course, we need to be able to increase our population from the countries that can't take, they're going to be too
Yeah,
uninhabitable.
yeah. I mean, I think mass migration is something that some of us are very worried about, and I think the penny's beginning to drop that mass migration through effectively large areas of the world becoming uninhabitable is going to be
Yeah,
a real challenge for all of us.
yeah.
Anyway, that's a geopolitical issue, which I'm not sure we're going to solve that one on today's podcast. But do you want to just come back to retrofit? Because retrofit's one of those areas which means so many things to so many people. In many respects, it's too complicated for the industry to cope with, because there's not a lot of there's not a lot of output specifications. There's a lot of input specifications. But trying to find out how it's going to work as a holistic whole is a challenge. How do you sort of square that circle?
Well, okay. So first, we're calling it retrofit, but retrofit means different things to different people. And in fact, in Europe, and I've spent a bit of time working or studying what they're doing in Europe, they call it renovation. And if they're improving the energy efficiency, they call it energy renovation. But in the UK, we'd probably call an energy efficiency improvement a retrofit. Whereas if we got a new kitchen and bathroom, we might call that a renovation. So language is important. And I suppose retrofit for me is about upgrading buildings to improve energy efficiency, but as well, comfort and resilience and avoiding unintended consequences. And I recently I passed my retrofit coordinator qualification through the Retrofit
Well
Academy.
done.
So thank you to them.
Yeah.
And it really consolidated my understanding of building physics and understanding why buildings perform and why they don't. So it's all very well putting some energy efficiency measures on the outside of your home, say you're going to, or inside, you could put some insulation in. But if you don't think about ventilation strategy, you're going to end up with damp and mold. And for example, bricks, when they're very wet, they're a very poor insulator. So if you've created interstitial condensations, it's a bit of a complex term for early in the morning, but if you're not allowing ventilation and moisture and buildings to breathe, and you perhaps breathe isn't the right word, but moisture control is so essential. And that's why I go back to systems thinking and this holistic approach, because you need to think about the whole thing, not just about retrofitting by sticking on some insulation. Or equally, you shouldn't just stick on a heat pump or some solar panels without thinking about how they're going to work and how your building's performing and how it will perform in the future.
And do you think the industry is actually equipped to be able to provide that systems, that holistic view? Because we're a very fragmented sector, and you can put somebody will come and put the solar panels on, somebody else do the heat pump,
Yeah.
but they may not then understand the issues about the ventilation or the interstitial condensation or anything else.
Yeah. So
How do we
short
overcome
answer,
that?
no. No, we're not ready. There's massive skills gap, and that's another thing that I've looking to address as part of Elevate. And I want to talk about Elevate Academy, which is something that I'm planning to do.
Okay.
But in answer to your question, we have a hugely fragmented sector, and I believe it's the most fragmented sector of all sectors in the UK. There's more self-employed people working in construction than any other industry, and that's a huge challenge. So I think that some of the ways we can overcome this are to more training, but training and taking time away from people's day job is a challenge. So I suppose creating lots of different ways for us to disseminate important issues out to people, and I suppose podcasts and YouTube and that kind of thing, it's really important that we do. People have quite short attention spans, so these little snippets on TikTok, and that's the way that the younger generation are learning. But we also, I believe, we need a lot more practical examples so that those organizations, those fragmented organizations, can come together and learn from. So perhaps this is a good time for me to talk about Elevate Academy, which is
Go on
my
then.
plan for really showcasing what we should do and how we should do it.
Okay.
So I'm planning to buy a property in Gloucestershire, which is where I live, and it's really a real world example of what best practice looks like,
Okay.
and it'll be a learning hub for industry professionals to come and see cutting edge solutions in action. So how the innovation really works, what it feels like, what it looks like, how it's exactly the same as a normal home, and how it's completely different, and how you would live in it, offering learners the opportunity to stay over. So there's a sleepover option with
Good.
this, because a
Lovely.
lot of the time you might go to a demonstration venue for heat pumps, but you can't stay over and you can't really understand what that feels like in a real world setting.
Yep.
And then that's sort of a weekday plan for Elevate Academy. And at the weekends, it's going to be holiday accommodation. And I don't believe much holiday accommodation exists that is truly sustainable. You try and look on these holiday search websites, and there's very few that are truly sustainable. You can't search, is it A rated? There's no such thing exists. So
No.
it's a combination of a learning space and a residential building that just performs brilliantly, hopefully.
Well, I'm sure with the right design and the right delivery, it will do. I think it's a great idea, Al, and I wish you every luck with it because
Thank
it's.
you.
I think you're quite right. People need to see something tangible
Yeah.
to
Don't tell
understand
me,
how they do
show
it.
me.
Yeah, yeah. And the industry works on if they've seen it done before, then they're more likely to make it happen going forward. So that's that. I mean, I wish you every luck with that.
Thanks.
And it's
I'll
going to
keep you
have a
updated.
bit of everything in it. So you're doing solar and heat pumps and insulation and heat
Yeah,
recovery and
all of that. Well, the plan is to buy an existing property that needs to be retrofitted. And then also, hopefully, there'll be space to put some new construction as well. Obviously, as an offsite construction someone obsessed with offsite construction, I want to bring in those aspects too. So, using prefabricated elements for new build, but also prefabricated elements for the retrofit idea. And then, yes, all the technology. So the first thing to do is to monitor the building and understand how the building's performance. So that would happen right at the outset to understand the
yeah,
existing scenario, then put all of the monitoring systems in, and heat, as you said, probably heat pumps, solar panels, definitely, storage, both heat and electric storage,
yeah,
and then using that sort of mini power station to provide power to be shared among all the buildings on the
mm,
site, and understanding how we can think about in the future how our energy can be democratized and
yeah, yeah.
generated and used more locally, and sort of
Well,
demonstrating that aspect as well.
yeah. So smart grids are something which I'm a
Mm,
great fan of because they do exactly that. They democratize who's got energy they by giving the access to the best areas to everybody within that grid.
exactly.
And it's a great concept. Oh, well, I wish you well, and I think it's the other thing it's worth pointing out is that none of these technologies are particularly new. They've been around for a long time. We were building houses in the 80s with full heat recovery in them, and passing stale moist air out of heat exchangers, recovering over 90% of the heat and bringing it back into to the living areas. It's not
That's
old. It's not a
right.
new technology.
It's not new, but funnily enough, we've been very slow to adopt, and that goes back to, our changing our sector and changing perceptions is like turning a bus. So really that's why we need the demonstration element. And one of the things I've considered and been challenged on with my Elevate Academy plan is that, you're going to put all this new technology and innovation in. How are you going to keep it up to date and current? And my plan is to enable things to be quite transitional and to be adaptable. And that's, again, it comes back to how our buildings, we're
Hmm.
building resilience within them. So the buildings would be able to change their use slightly over the time, but
Yeah,
also making sure that we're able to disassemble. So we often talk about designing for manufacturing and assembly, DFMA that is. We need to think about DFMA and disassembly. So ensuring that at the end of their life, we can take things apart again and they can either be reused or recycled, and last resort, obviously, landfill. But at the moment, the way we build is gather resources, build, and then at the end of their life, or even in some cases not at the end of their life, and we've just decided that this building's not right for us, we
yeah,
demolish, and a lot of the time materials are not getting repurposed. But when I built my own family home, it's called Brock House. That was, it was A rated. This completed in 2014, and at the time it was A rated, and which was pretty much unheard of. There was a few buildings at the
yeah, yeah.
time, and I didn't use a heat pump, but we have got mechanical ventilation heat recovery. We installed solar panels, and a couple of years later we installed a home battery. So 10 years on, those technologies are still new, apparently, even though, as you've just said, they're not really.
They're
But
not.
people
No.
are still saying, oh, you've got a modern home, and this technology is fairly new, can I come and have a look? And part of my frustration is, well, this is my home, I don't really want to show everybody around it. But with Elevate Academy, there'll be an opportunity to showcase every day of the week. Maybe not
Brilliant.
every day, I might be a bit tired.
Oh, well, wish you every luck. I mean, on the retrofit, I mean, it's a massive subject. We've got and the numbers are just enormous, aren't they? The number of homes we've actually got to retrofit. And I like your concept that it's a modernization. It's not it's a regeneration rather than a retrofit. I mean, how are we going to win the hearts and minds of people to get this to happen? I mean, it not only requires funding, but it requires a change in attitude in society, doesn't it?
Absolutely. People are so keen to spend 15 grand on a new kitchen, but they won't spend that money improving the energy efficiency of their home. And there's a perception as well that energy improvements don't improve the value of your home. But I believe in the last few years that has shifted significantly with the energy costs the way they were in the last few years. People are paying more attention to their energy efficiency of their home. But a shift in culture is absolutely vital because we've got to help people see the link between poor
Mm.
performing homes
Yeah.
and health and well-being. So a shift in culture is essential. And you talked about the numbers there. Well, briefly, just for housing, they say there's, I mean, numbers vary depending on sources, but 25 to 28 million homes need
Yeah.
to be retrofitted. 80% of our building stock that we'll have in 2050 already exists. So
Mm.
the challenge is huge. And I think that perception and this sort of culture of our industry has changed a lot in the last couple of years. And when I started working in retrofit about 4 years ago, um, I would go to conferences and retrofit. I was like, is it a swear word? Because nobody has said the word retrofit. I'm at a timber conference and no one's mentioning the word retrofit. But now that's changed massively. And you even at the sort of more mainstream conferences, which are not about sustainability, people are talking about retrofit because they've identified
Mm.
the massive failings in our existing building stock, not just houses, but just look at the issues with rack in schools recently. That we should have been well aware that that was coming. We knew the design life
Yeah.
of rack, and yet 2 days before schools are starting, we went,
Oh,
oh beep, we've got
you got
children
to
coming
rack.
in and we've got to close this school. So we need to be much better at the maintenance of all our buildings, and there's a long way to go.
There is, and yeah, there's no doubt. Certainly in my lifetime, the handover manuals that came from CDM are now really becoming far more sophisticated, becoming electronic, becoming online, and
Mm.
those sort of warnings and those sort of requirements are being flagged much better than they ever used to be. And that's partly because actually the life of our buildings, I think, is actually is reducing, isn't it? We're not expecting buildings to last as long as they did.
Yeah.
We're still teaching in, Victorian schools. I doubt there will be many Elizabethan schools that will be teaching in 100 years' time. Those buildings will be time limited, and we'll be looking to renovate and completely rework those buildings by the time we get, within that sort of time scale.
Do you think that's come from the need of our industry to put warranties on design life? And then we've gone, oh, well, that's got a 30-year design life, or that's got a 60-year design life. Therefore, we're making assumptions about the longevity of a building.
I think it's actually to do with the design. We design everything, we value everything, engineer everything down to get the maximum value, specified value, and that includes the design life. So we're designing things down to that design life, and that's
Mm.
to try and keep the capital cost down.
Yeah,
And that's the challenge. It's a real challenge I think for the sector, because what we're actually doing is we're taking the resilience out of these buildings.
yeah,
So the Victorian schools we talked about are resilient buildings because they've been over designed, if you like.
yeah,
Well, I say I worry that the schools we're putting up now have very little resilience in them. And you can see that, the schools that built 20 years ago are overheating badly in summer.
yeah, yeah.
They haven't got the ventilation that was required. They haven't got the cooling capacity or the thermal mass in those buildings to be able to make them fit for education in today's weather. And that's bad design in my book.
Um, but schools is a subject I'm really passionate about because of the impact on our young people, and then
Mm.
that what they're bringing home, or the lack of learning that they're going to be able to do from being in a poor environment. And sometimes when a young person goes to school, that's the respite from
Yeah,
very
yeah.
poor conditions they've got at home. And I've been following a journey of a UK company that's using industrialized retrofit to modernize a school, and they've done a trial with UK homegrown timber, and they've created it into panels, and they've addressed it's a school in Hampshire through a pilot. Now, it's called the Scholar system, that was built in I think it was the 60s and 70s.
I remember
Hundreds,
renovating Scholar.
there you go. So hundreds of these schools were built.
Yeah,
It's a steel frame system. And what the design for this renovation has been was removing the existing very poorly performing facade and then replacing it with a timber structure, which is hung from the existing
still. Yeah,
steel. So
yeah.
you're reusing the steel element, but you're bringing the biophilic benefits of wood into the classroom. And the benefits for that type of renovation, it's not just about the energy efficiency of that building, it's about the young people being exposed to the wood and having that much better quality of environment. They're also going to be exposed to a renovation process and understanding about how it's going to impact their learning. They're going to take that learning through their lives, hopefully take it home and tell their parents about how building health is important, and hopefully go on to be the engineers of the future, that we can use them to help with the many other buildings that we need to address.
Yeah. Well, if you're interested in schools, I shall give you an invitation to go and look at Whitecross High School in Hereford, which is not far from you in Gloucestershire.
Brilliant.
It won the Architects Award for Best in Use Building 5 years after opening. But on opening, it was the BRE said it was the best or second best school in the country for educational efficiency, which is my view why we build schools. So the teachers had a better chance of teaching children in that school than virtually anywhere else in the country.
And it's not a coincidence, is it, that the good teaching goes hand in hand with a good building? And that's why you have the WELL standard, which has come about through offices. WELL standard promotes healthy environments in the workplace, and that is because that's been driven by a need to retain staff. Staff stay in work because they're in a nice environment and they're more productive. They miss less work because and therefore it all just leads to more efficiency. So these are holistic systems thinking solutions that I'm a big advocate for.
Obviously. And clearly very important, because if you're running an office, losing people is a major cost that you're going to incur.
Exactly.
Let's just come on to MMC, because I know you've got quite a lot of experience on modern methods of construction, and one of the things that worries me is that people think MMC is bringing large boxes around the country.
Yeah.
But actually, there's an awful lot of things that get built off site, which aren't large boxes, which actually can contribute to the savings on site, but also the efficiencies and the quality. I mean, quite frankly, we can get far better quality building these smaller elements off site. How are we going to get better MMC across the sector? How are we going to manage to do that?
Yeah, so there's a huge amount of misconception about what MMC is. Modern methods of construction have been, I mean, it's not even modern, so it's mislabeled to start with. It's been around since post-war or even earlier. You see old videos of trying to modernise the industry. So I sit on the Construction Leadership Council's Industrialised Construction Working Group. So IC, Industrialised Construction, is what we're calling it at the moment. But and I say at the moment because there's still debates about what we're going to call it. And some of the problems that have been covered a lot in the media around the failures of MMC really relate to the failures of volumetric or category 1 on the MMC definition framework. They relate to the transportation, relate to volumetric boxes. And one of the issues is that you're transporting fresh air, which is obviously incredibly inefficient, but that is efficient for certain types of buildings, things like hotel rooms, or where there's a lot of repetition in smaller modules. But the problem is we've been trying to apply those principles to housing, and it hasn't really worked. And there was a lot of investment from the government into companies producing volumetric boxes. And it was a shame, really, because if we'd have put that same investment into other types of MMC, the first one that comes to mind for most probably would be panelized construction, which is category 2. But there's another 5 categories of MMC. I won't go through them all, but things like panels, facade systems, modular pieces that can be brought in that are pre-manufactured have so much potential to improve efficiency and to improve safety. And probably from where I've come at this from is for sustainability. There's much less waste, and thinking about how you can assemble and disassemble. And again, it comes back to that whole life cycle of a building. So some of the things I've been working on in terms of industrialized retrofit, there's a lot of work been done by Energy Sprong in the UK and abroad that have been trying to understand and bring more of, especially to the UK. But things like internal wall insulation systems, we can scan an existing building for the internal part of the external walls, scan those buildings and create a kit of parts system where tradespeople can assemble near the work face, but systems that are already cut to size and ready to put together. That type of work would accelerate our retrofit program massively, which is hugely needed, so that those interventions can take place over the course of a few days rather than disrupting people for months on end. So I suppose that's the big area where I think industrialized retrofit can really be impactful.
So that's effectively speed of construction, isn't it? You say the disruption for people on site, particularly people in their own homes.
Yeah.
And we know that time spent on site is cost, it directly equates to cost. So yeah, really, really good place to be.
I know. Think about the skip that you'd have in front of a project renovating. They just, I've seen it myself, and all the stuff that's in the skip from all the offcuts. It's so inefficient. But if you were to take the cutting processes, for example, away from site and do lots of them in one place, all of that waste is, well, hopefully reduced, but it's all in one place together rather than outside every individual home where you're then trying to manage it. I just think there's got to be a better way.
God, what comes around goes round. So we were building houses in the 80s with a Swedish system, timber frame houses, and the managing director from Sweden came over to see us building them. And his first comment was he saw one of our carpenters walking around with a saw attached to his belt. He said, if I see a carpenter with a saw on my site, he is sacked on the spot. He said, if that carpenter thinks he can cut a piece of timber better than I can cut in my factory, he's in the wrong site. And that's exactly to your point there. We can get those offcuts and get everything built as it should do off site and bring it in and install it much the best way.
And that's really one of my frustrations, that we see what they're doing in other countries. And, you brought up Sweden, which they're really leading the way, Germany as well. And when I researched for when I built my own home, which we used off-site panel construction, well, I went to Germany, I went to a number of factories, and this is sort of 15 years ago when I was doing this research, and we've still not caught up with the technology that they were using to manufacture panels then. So that question of why that is, I don't know the answer to, but I'd like to know, and I'd like it if we were to work towards some efficiencies in the way that they do in the likes of Sweden and Germany.
Okay, well, there's a call to arms for somebody who might need to go and have a look and see how that works. You mentioned one of your current clients, clients you're working for at the moment, Indie Nature. So do you want to just talk around about what exciting projects they're on at the moment?
Yes, absolutely. So Indie Nature I've been working with for just over 6 months, and such an exciting company because they're really addressing so many issues that we've got in construction all at once. So they produce natural fiber insulation, and it's grown in our fields from hemp and other bio-based materials.
Okay.
It's grown in Scotland and in Yorkshire. In fact, so it was grown in Yorkshire, and then last year, Indie Nature were part of the first hemp growing trials in Scotland, and then some of that material was made into product in the last few months in our factory in the Scottish Borders. So Indie Nature's used as internal and external wall insulation, but I suppose the big draw, hopefully, is that as it's growing, it's absorbing carbon. So rather than emitting carbon, and embodied carbon is something that's become much more of a hot topic in the last year or so. I suppose it's a bit like retrofit. I think we're a few years behind the word retrofit. Embodied carbon, something that's been on everyone's lips for the last maybe a year or 18 months. People are waking up to the fact that as we reduce the operational carbon in our buildings, we need to think about embodied carbon. So Indie Nature is absorbing carbon and overall is a net absorber of carbon. So obviously there's still emissions that are produced during the process from transportation and from manufacturing, but overall sequestering carbon rather than emitting it. But the other really, or I say one of the other great things about Indie Nature is that it's regulating moisture. And I talked about the importance of ventilation earlier.
Okay,
so
yeah.
it's allowing moisture to naturally move through the product to the outside. So I won't go into building physics, but the moisture wants to go from
It goes from
it wants to move from high to low. So because it's able to regulate moisture naturally, it's a really powerful material you can use in retrofitting. But they're also using it in new builds as well. So trying to use it where buildings want to be fully biodegradable and want to be fully circular, and don't emit a lot of carbon during the production. And I think one of the big dangers that we've got as an industry is that we want to build, and the embodied carbon of all these building materials is massive. So we could build a passive house, but if we're using very heavily carbon emitting materials to do that, we're probably just going to use up all our carbon budget in the building of it. So operationally it'll be very low, but we haven't thought about the construction and the building phase.
So are you seeing clients then measuring their embodied carbon of their project? Because in Europe, many countries in Europe now asked to see, or you have to report on the embodied carbon of a new building.
Right. So there is a new EU regulation that's requiring the reporting of embodied carbon, and that is going to impact British companies where they've got an EU subsidiary or where they've got any part of their company operates in the EU, and then they have to also report on the embodied carbon in the UK. So although we're a bit slow in the UK to be regulating on embodied carbon, there is Part Z, which was some legislation that was proposed. I think it was first proposed not last year, but the year before. That regulation has stalled in the UK, but notwithstanding that, as you say, the EU are ahead of us and have started to report embodied carbon. I just think it's a matter of time, to be honest with you, that in the UK we'll be doing that as well. The regulation will have to catch up.
We've done a lot of podcasts on the topic, and the view from those at the front edge is that we're going to be taxed on carbon, and that there'll be carbon accounting coming through the whole of UK PLC.
Yeah.
So every corporate entity will be reporting on its carbon, and where it's using it, it will be taxed on it.
Yeah.
Which will change everybody's behaviours very rapidly.
I think so, and it can't come soon enough for companies like Indie Nature, because at the moment, because of the scale and the age of, well, I suppose we've been using hemp as a material for literally like millennia.
Absolutely.
It was there was a change in the law in the 60s which meant it couldn't be grown. So that's been recently changed. So it means that it can be grown, but it's the perception. And the cost at the moment to manufacture hemp insulation is significantly more than the materials that we're used to specifying, like glass wool, for example. But the environmental impact from some of the sort of oil-based insulations is significant. And so once we start counting in the carbon tax, then it will be much more affordable to go down the natural material route.
Yeah, I mean, I think certainly a lot of people we've been interviewing on the podcast have been saying by the end of the decade we'll have full carbon accounting, which I think is plays to the strengths of people like Indie Nature you're talking about.
And I suppose it's not just the embodied carbon aspect. It's when we start thinking holistically about health outcomes and about things like, oh, how much PPE do I need to wear installing Indie Nature? Well, none, because you can rub it. I like to rub it on my face because it's nice and soft to touch. So those other benefits, that other value proposition around, it's easy to install. You don't need adhesives. Acoustically, it's much better. So when we start thinking holistically, going back to that again, then the value proposition is much better, rather than just the race for the bottom. Going for the cheapest is not going to give the best outcomes.
So we need to find somewhere valuing that. It's not just the carbon; it's the other added benefits that we've got.
Indeed.
Let's move on, Elle. I mean, because we met in the Women in Construction Awards, and it actually was the back end of last year. But we were discussing how just women were making an enormous contribution in the sector, and we were talking about how you and I were talking about how we supported those women in the industry. I think it's worth perhaps giving you the opportunity just to say how we ought to be inspiring more people, not just women, but a much greater diversity of people, including women, to pursue careers that make a real impact in the sector, because there's a fantastic opportunity, isn't there?
Oh, definitely. There's so many young people that want to work in careers that align with their values. So, careers that have a social and environmental impact. And it's not just about climate change, it's about biodiversity loss, resource depletion, the unacceptable state of our housing. These are issues that are affecting young people directly and will impact them much more than
Yeah.
us old fogies. And so, you know,
Not going to call you an old fogey, Del. I might fit the girl category, but certainly you won't.
well, I think these aren't distant issues anyway. These are issues
No.
that are happening right now that are, they're impacting every aspect of our lives. And so instead of just worrying about the future, young people have got the power to shape it. And construct. There's no industry that doesn't have more power than construction, than for practical, direct, meaningful ways that they can make a difference. We've already talked about carbon and energy, the quality of life and the health of young people in our buildings, and the potential impact on our natural resources and our natural environment. So we really need to have a diverse range of voices at leadership tables. And I think I talked to you about the importance of women being part of that, but young people as well, because they're the ones who are going to shape our future. And is it Ruth Bader Ginsburg? Apologies if I've got her name wrong, but she said women belong in all places where decisions are being made. And I think that's very true. And young people too, they should be part of shaping the built environment. And I think one of the things that upsets me and depresses me is when I see photos of, oh, we've built this amazing building, look what we've accomplished. And there's a picture of a dozen men in suits. And I'm sure that those men are the ones that are making the decisions, and the leaders, the directors of the project. But where are the women? Where are the women that were consulted and part of the decision, even if they weren't in charge? Were their voices heard? And if not, is that a success? Because it's not just a nice thing to say, but better outcomes come from a range of voices. So that there's studies that show that. So we really need to make sure that everyone's voices are listened to and heard, because then we will get better outcomes. And that again is it's a systems thinking approach, that we're not just thinking about one type of outcome, we're thinking about holistic outcomes, and sometimes you need the diverse range of voices to get that range of outcomes.
Yeah, and I think that for me, our industry is a logical, practical industry, and quite often we need to explain the reason why and the benefits of doing something, and the resilience we need in our businesses and our buildings. Requires a diversity of thinking that simply we're not going to have if we've got all the same people running businesses and doing it. And I have the same challenge around boards. The directors of businesses need to be diverse as well, and we need to have we need to focus really heavily on getting the diversity into those boards, because that's actually where culture is set, and some of the challenges are met head on. And that's one of the things I think we need to be looking as an industry, how we get better directors managing businesses.
And also increasing the visibility of the women that are in leadership positions. And then that is tough for those women, because they're often sort of, well, you're a leader a female leader in construction, and constantly sort of saying, being put up as someone to look at. So that's a challenge, always putting the expectation on those women. But we can increase the visibility of women in the mid senior level, so that they're having the confidence to go up and be leaders. And I suppose one of the things I've struggled with is people have said to me, "Oh, you're a leader. We want to hear from you." And I've gone, am I a leader? Just because I've gone out and started saying things, I've started saying what I think. People have started calling me a leader, which is nice. So, but I suppose it's something I've shied away from in the past. But more recently, I've tried to build my confidence, and I took a CITB funded leadership program called The Power Within Her. So that was about empowering women and your voice, and developing the confidence and resilience in a male dominated industry, and developing leadership skills. But I suppose I've felt that I haven't had to put myself out there, but I felt like it's the right thing to do to try and have a voice that I felt like I didn't have as a younger person in the
Mhm.
industry, someone to look up to. So I'm trying to be someone who can mentor other women and be visible so that other women go, well, I'm gonna follow that example. And I'm trying to be a role model for others.
And great, as you absolutely should do, Al. I mean, there are some, the awards profile 100 fantastic women doing fantastic work. And I think you and I talked about we shouldn't really need these awards, but we do need to get more diversity into the industry, and we need to reflect society far better than we do at the moment. So, uh, and I'm a great believer that you can be a leader wherever you are in your business. It's,
Yeah,
from the bottom to the top, we can all be leaders in our areas.
I founded Elevate, and suddenly I'm a company director, but I wasn't a director, or in a particular leadership position in my previous jobs. So I
Mhm.
suppose it took me having the guts to start my own business, to become a director that way. But I didn't feel heard. I didn't feel um, like I was making enough impact when I was doing the other roles. So I decided to make the change myself.
Brilliant. Well, I hope you have all the impact you deserve, because you've clearly got a fantastic set of skills and experience to reflect what's going on in the industry. El, we've had a very mindful of time, and we've had a great run through all sorts of areas. My last question is really sort of a call to arms. We've talked around about so many things that need to change in the sector and the culture that needs to move. What if you got a sort of a single thing that you'd like, if you could change, wave your magic wand and sprinkle your fairy dust? Where what would you change as your sort of number one priority?
Oh, that's a tough one.
I'm going to limit you to one because we've covered so many.
Um, I think that it goes back to systems thinking, and I haven't defined wicked problems, but they're problems which are interconnected, and we need to really base our decision making much more on system thinking's approaches. So I think my call to arms would be, when we're trying to address a problem, don't just try and solve one thing in isolation, but rather think of this problem as its part within a wider system.
Brilliant, brilliant, and very apt, because we live in a very, very complicated, sophisticated industry, and we do need to see the law of unintended consequences is something that lots of people miss out.
Yeah,
Well,
thank you.
I've had a really great conversation. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you for your time, and thank you for your wisdom, and keep up the good work. There's a lot of cultural change we need to push through this sector, and it's people throughout the sector are going to make the difference. So thank you very much for your time today, and wish you every success.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.